Rain hammered against the massive windows of Cha Estate as lightning split the Seoul night sky. Zara Thompson tightened her grip on her nursing bag while following a maid through endless marble hallways. The pay for this assignment was enough to erase months of debt, but something about the mansion felt heavy, almost haunted. The maid stopped outside a bedroom. "Miss Hana is inside." Zara took a breath and entered. The room was beautiful. Stuffed animals. Yet the little girl sitting by the window looked heartbreakingly frail. Hana slowly turned. The moment their eyes met, the child froze. A tear slid down her cheek. Then another. Suddenly, she climbed off the bed and ran toward Zara as fast as her weak legs could carry her. The room erupted in panic. But Hana ignored everyone. She threw her arms around Zara's waist and began crying. "Mommy!" Zara's heart nearly stopped. The room fell silent. The little girl looked up with trembling lips. "You're the mommy from my dreams." Shock swept across every face. The nurses stared. The servants exchanged nervous glances. And standing near the fireplace, a tall man dressed in black slowly rose to his feet. One of the most feared Mafia bosses in Korea. His cold eyes locked onto Zara. He looked at her as if she were the answer to a question he'd been trying to solve for years. Then Hana whispered something that sent chills through the room. "I knew you'd come back." Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from and your thoughts about the story. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The silence that followed Hana's words stretched so long that Zara could hear the rain still drumming against the windows, could hear her own heartbeat slamming in her ears. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, waiting, judging, and she realized she still hadn't said a single word. Zara knelt slowly, careful not to break the child's grip around her waist, and tried to meet Hana's eyes without frightening her further. "Sweetheart, I think you might have me confused with someone else. I've never been to Korea before. I've never met you." Hana only shook her head fiercely against Zara's side, arms tightening. "No. You. I know your voice. I know your hands." Across the room, Cha Tae-jin had not moved from where he stood near the fireplace, but the temperature in the air seemed to drop several degrees anyway. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, the kind of calm that Zara instinctively understood was more dangerous than shouting. "Explain." "I can't," Zara said honestly. "I don't have an explanation. I was hired through an agency in the States. I flew in 3 days ago. I have never set foot in this house or this country before tonight." His eyes studied her the way a man studies a ledger he suspects has been falsified, searching for the seam, the place where the numbers don't add up. Zara held his gaze, refusing to look away, though something about the weight of his attention made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "My daughter does not say things without reason," he said finally. "She has never once mistaken a stranger for family. Not staff. Not doctors. Not the dozen nurses who came before you." "Then maybe," Zara said carefully, "there's something here neither of us understands yet." A cough interrupted them. Not Hana's, but the girl seemed to weaken all at once, her small body sagging slightly against Zara's arm. Tae-jin was across the room in 3 strides, crouching beside his daughter, his composed mask slipping just enough for Zara to see the raw fear underneath. "Hana," he murmured, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "Are you in pain?" "I'm tired, Appa," Hana whispered. "But she's here now. She has to stay." The head physician, an older man named Dr. Kwan who had clearly been standing at a respectful distance throughout the entire scene, stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Chairman Cha, if I may. Hana's oxygen levels dropped again this afternoon. The new medication isn't responding the way we hoped. I think it would be wise to let her rest, and to discuss her care plan somewhere more private." Tae-jin nodded once, lifting Hana gently into his arms despite her murmured protests, and carried her toward the bed. Zara moved to help, adjusting the pillows, checking the monitor readouts out of habit even though this wasn't officially her patient yet. Might never be, depending on what happened in the next few minutes. In the hallway outside, Once Hana had drifted into an uneasy sleep with a nurse posted at her bedside, Dr. Kwan turned to Zara with tired eyes. "Her heart is failing, Miss Thompson. Slowly but surely. We are managing symptoms, not curing anything. She needs stability, comfort, someone she trusts completely. Whatever just happened in there. I've been treating this child for 2 years and I have never seen her attached to anyone the way she attached to you in 30 seconds. I don't understand it either," Zara admitted. "Perhaps you don't need to understand it tonight." Dr. Kwan glanced toward the closed door. "Perhaps you only need to decide whether you're staying." Zara thought of her empty apartment back home, the medical bills stacked on her counter, the assignment she'd accepted for money and nothing more. She thought of the way the little girl's arms had felt locked around her waist, desperate and certain, as though she'd been waiting years for exactly this moment. "I'll stay," she said. "At least until she's stronger." Tae-jin appeared in the doorway then, having overheard the last of it. He said nothing, only studied her for a long moment before giving the smallest nod and disappearing back inside. That night, long after the mansion had gone quiet and most of the staff had retired, Zara sat in the chair beside Hana's bed, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the glass. She was reviewing the medication chart by lamplight when a small voice broke the silence. "You came back late this time." Zara looked up. Hana's eyes were open, watching her with none of the earlier hysteria. Only a quiet, solemn trust that felt older than her 7 years. "I'm sorry. In my dreams," Hana said, pushing herself up slightly against the pillows. "You always come when I'm scared. But this time you took so long. I waited and waited." Zara set the chart down slowly. "How long have you been dreaming about me, Hana?" The girl considered this with the seriousness only children bring to impossible questions. "Since I was very small. Before we moved to this house. I don't remember a time without you." A chill moved through Zara that she couldn't quite name. "What do I do in these dreams?" "You hold my hand. You tell me not to be afraid." Hana's small fingers plucked at the blanket. "You always say the same thing when the dark gets too big. You say the sun will come back. I used to draw pictures of it so I wouldn't forget your face." Zara's breath caught somewhere in her chest. "You have drawings." Hana nodded, suddenly brighter than she'd been all evening, and pointed toward a low wooden chest tucked beneath the window seat. "Lots. Appa doesn't know how many. Do you want to see them?" Zara glanced at the clock, well past midnight, and then back at the girl's hopeful waiting face, and found she couldn't possibly say no. "Show me," she said quietly, and Hana was already reaching for the chest, small hands trembling with an excitement that no illness could dim. The chest was heavier than it looked, and when Hana lifted the lid, Zara found herself staring down at what must have been 100 pieces of paper, some crumpled and worn soft at the edges from handling, others crisp and recent. Hana began pulling them out one by one, arranging them across the blanket with the careful reverence of someone unveiling a shrine. "This is the oldest one," Hana said, holding up a drawing rendered in the careless scribbles of a very young child, maybe 3 or 4 years old at the time. Even through the crude lines, Zara could make out a woman's face. Dark skin, warm brown eyes, hair pulled back from her forehead exactly the way Zara wore hers now. "And this one," Hana continued, pulling out another, more refined. "And this. And this." Drawing after drawing, spanning what looked like years of a child's growth, and every single one bore some unmistakable echo of Zara's own face. The shape of her eyes. The gap between her front teeth. Even a small mole near her collarbone that Zara herself sometimes forgot was there, faithfully rendered in crayon on a page that had to be at least 3 years old. "Hana," Zara said carefully, her voice not quite steady. "Who taught you to draw me like this? Did you see a photograph somewhere? Did someone show you a picture?" Hana shook her head, confused by the question. "I told you. It's from my dreams. Sunshine mommy visits when I'm scared of the dark, or when the doctors hurt me, or when Appa has to go away for his work and I don't know if he's coming back. She holds my hand and she says, 'The sunshine always comes back, Hana. Even after the longest night.'" The phrase settled over Zara like a hand closing gently around her throat. She had heard those exact words before. She was certain of it, though she couldn't place where, couldn't summon the memory no matter how hard she reached for it. It sat just beyond the edge of recollection, familiar and maddening, like a song heard once in childhood and never since. "Say that again," Zara whispered. "The sunshine part." "The sunshine always comes back," Hana repeated obediently, "even after the longest night." Zara pressed a hand to her own chest, feeling her heart stutter against her ribs. She didn't know why those words made her want to cry. She only knew that some deep, wordless part of her recognized them as true, as hers, as though she'd spoken them 100 times before in a life she couldn't quite remember living. "Hana, sweetheart, this is..." She struggled for words. "This is a very unusual thing. Dreams don't normally work this way." "I know." Hana said it simply, without any of the anxiety an adult might have brought to such a statement. To her it was not a mystery to be solved but a fact to be enjoyed, like sunshine itself. "That's why I always knew you'd come. Sunshine, Mommy promised." Zara sifted through the drawings again, searching for some explanation. A photograph Hana might have seen once, a nanny who resembled her, anything logical. And then her fingers stopped on a page near the bottom of the pile, one Hana hadn't yet shown her. It was more detailed than the others, drawn perhaps a year or two ago, depicting the woman's figure standing in what looked like a crowded, brightly lit space filled with the crude scribbled shapes of suitcases and rolling luggage carts. In the corner of the drawing, in a child's shaky handwriting, were 3 small words that made the hair on Zara's arms rise. Zara didn't sleep at all that night. Over the following days, Zara found herself learning the true shape of the house she'd stepped into, and the true shape of the man who ruled it. She overheard hushed conversations between staff who fell silent whenever she entered a room. She noticed the way security guards stationed throughout the property straightened instinctively whenever Tae-jin passed, the way even the head housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mrs. Yoon, seemed to shrink slightly under his gaze. It was Mrs. Yoon, eventually, who told her the truth without quite meaning to. "You should be careful what you ask about the chairman's business," the older woman said one afternoon, folding linens with brisk, practiced hands. "Cha Tae-jin did not build this house, this company, this name by being gentle. Men who cross him do not simply disappear from Seoul. They disappear from everywhere." "He seems different with Hana," Zara said carefully. Mrs. Yoon's hands paused. Something in her face softened. "Ah, that is the one truth in this house that everyone agrees on. Since his wife died, that child is the only soft place left in him. He has sat beside her bed every single night for 2 years. Even when business calls him across the world, he flies back before midnight so he does not miss it. Even when men far more powerful than kings request his time, he refuses them if it conflicts with her bedtime." Zara thought of the cold, calculating man from that first night, the one whose gaze had felt like being assessed for a threat. It was hard to reconcile that image with the one Mrs. Yoon described, a father terrified of losing the last piece of his family he had left. She began to see it for herself soon enough. Late one night, unable to sleep, she passed by Hana's room and found the door slightly ajar. Tae-jin sat in the chair Zara usually occupied, Hana's small hand held loosely in both of his much larger ones. His head bowed as though in prayer. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't doing anything at all except sitting in the dark, keeping vigil over his sleeping daughter with a devotion so raw it made Zara's chest ache. She didn't announce herself. She simply stood in the shadowed hallway and watched a dangerous man become, for a few private hours each night, only a frightened father, and something in her understanding of him shifted permanently. It was 3 nights later that the crisis came. Zara had just finished Hana's evening medication when the monitors began shrieking their alarm, numbers plummeting across the screen faster than she could process. Hana's small body convulsed once, twice, her lips turning a shade of blue that sent ice through Zara's veins. "Get Dr. Kwon. Now!" Zara was already moving, tilting Hana's head, checking her airway, her training taking over even as her hands trembled. "Hana, honey, stay with me. Stay with me." The room exploded into controlled chaos, nurses rushing in, equipment wheeled through the door, Tae-jin arriving so fast he must have run the entire length of the mansion. His face drained of all color as he watched his daughter's small chest struggle for air. "What's happening to her?" he demanded, though it came out less like a question and more like a plea. Zara didn't have an answer. Neither, for several agonizing minutes, did anyone else. Hana survived the night, though it took every hour of it to stabilize her. By morning, exhausted and hollow-eyed, she managed a weak smile when she saw Zara still sitting beside her bed, refusing to leave despite Dr. Kwan's gentle suggestions that she rest. "You stayed," Hana whispered. "Of course I stayed," Zara said, smoothing the girl's hair back. "I told you I would." Recovery, when it came, arrived slowly, but it arrived. Zara made it her mission over the following 2 weeks to coax life back into the child piece by piece. She learned which songs made Hana laugh, which food she'd actually finish if presented the right way, which stories distracted her from the discomfort of treatments. She sat with her through physical therapy sessions that left the girl in tears from the effort, cheering every small victory as though it were an Olympic triumph. Slowly, painfully, Hana began to bloom again. Color returned to her cheeks. Her appetite improved enough that the kitchen staff began competing good-naturedly over whose dishes she'd request twice. She started asking to be wheeled out into the garden, laughing at the koi in the pond, insisting Zara learn every one of their names. The mansion itself seemed to exhale. Staff who had moved through the halls with quiet, careful tension began to relax, to smile more easily, to speak above a whisper. Mrs. Yoon started including Zara in the household's morning briefings without anyone officially deciding she should be there. The younger nurses began asking her advice, deferring to her the way one defers to family rather than staff. And Tae-jin began to change too, in ways so gradual Zara almost didn't notice until she looked back and measured the distance. He no longer questioned her methods. He began seeking her out after Hana's bedtime, not to interrogate her but simply to talk, about Hana's progress, about small updates, about nothing important at all except that neither of them seemed eager for those conversations to end. "She hasn't laughed like this in over a year," he told her one evening, watching through the window as Hana chased the household cat across the garden with more energy than she'd shown in months. "Whatever you've done, I don't have words for it." "She's a fighter," Zara said. "I just gave her a reason to keep fighting." He looked at her then in a way that made her feel unexpectedly seen, unexpectedly known, in a house full of people who still regarded her as a curious anomaly. "You gave us both one," he said quietly, and then, as though startled by his own honesty, turned and walked back inside before she could respond. It was around this time that Dr. Seo Ji-eun arrived to consult on Hana's ongoing treatment, a renowned pediatric cardiologist, sharp-eyed and immaculately composed, with a reputation for excellence that Dr. Kwan spoke of with real respect. She was, by every account, brilliant. She was also, from her very first conversation with Zara, cold in a way that had nothing to do with professional distance. "You're not a licensed physician," Ji-eun observed during their first meeting, flipping through Hana's chart with clinical precision. "Your notes here are thorough for a nurse, but I have to wonder what qualifies you to be this involved in her emotional care specifically." "I'm doing my job," Zara said evenly. "Are you?" Ji-eun's eyes flicked up, assessing. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've inserted yourself rather deeply into this family's private life. Children with terminal diagnoses often form intense attachments to caregivers. It isn't healthy, and frankly, it isn't professional to encourage it the way you have." Zara kept her expression neutral, though something in her chest tightened defensively. "I haven't encouraged anything. Hana attached herself to me the moment we met. I've simply tried to give her the stability she needs." "Convenient," Ji-eun said, and the word carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. The confrontation might have stayed private if Ji-eun had left it there. Instead, over the following days, Zara began noticing subtle shifts, Questions posed to Tae-jin about whether an unlicensed foreign nurse should really have unsupervised access to his daughter, comments made just loud enough for others to overhear about attachment disorders and boundary issues, a general campaign conducted with the polished deniability of someone who knew exactly how to plant doubt without ever appearing to. It came to a head during a family gathering Tae-jin hosted for Hana's recovery, a small, warm affair with close relatives and senior staff, meant to celebrate the girl's improved health. Ji-eun had been invited as Hana's physician, and she used the occasion to make her concerns known more directly, cornering Tae-jin near the refreshment table while Zara stood close enough to hear every word. "Chairman Cha, I say this with only your family's welfare in mind. This nurse has inserted herself into roles that go far beyond her position. It concerns me, and frankly it should concern you." Before Tae-jin could respond, a small, determined voice cut through the gathering. "Zara isn't inserting herself anywhere." Hana had wheeled herself closer, chin lifted with a defiance that seemed too large for her small frame. "She's my mommy. She's supposed to be here." The room went quiet. Ji-eun's composed expression flickered, just slightly. "Hana, sweetheart, that's not quite." "It is true," Hana insisted, louder now, reaching for Zara's hand and holding it up for the entire room to see, as though presenting evidence in a trial only she understood the stakes of. "Everyone, this is my mommy. She came back to me like she promised. I don't care what anybody says." A murmur rippled through the gathered relatives, some amused, some clearly moved, a few exchanging uncertain glances toward Tae-jin, waiting to see how he would respond to his daughter's public declaration. Zara felt her face heat, acutely aware of every eye in the room, of Ji-eun's narrowed gaze, of the sheer impossible weight of what Hana had just said in front of everyone who mattered. Tae-jin didn't correct her. He looked at his daughter's fierce, hopeful face, then at Zara standing beside her, hand in hand, and something settled in his expression. Not surprise, not the suspicion of that first stormy night, but something that looked unmistakably like acceptance. "She is," he said quietly, and the words seemed to cost him something enormous to speak aloud. "Exactly that." Later that night, long after the guests had gone and the house had settled into silence, Tae-jin found himself standing outside Hana's door, watching through the gap as Zara tucked his daughter in, humming some soft tune Hana had grown to love. He told himself he was only checking on them. He told himself the warmth spreading through his chest was simple gratitude, nothing more. But standing there in the dark, watching the woman his daughter called mommy brush a gentle hand over Hana's forehead, Tae-jin understood, with the same cold clarity he brought to every dangerous decision in his life, that he was no longer simply grateful for Zara Thompson's presence in his house. He wanted her to stay for reasons that had nothing to do with his daughter at all, and that realization frightened him more than any enemy he had ever faced. The garden had been transformed for Hana's birthday, strings of soft golden lights woven through the trees, a table laid with more cake than one small girl could ever hope to finish, and laughter drifting through the evening air in a way the mansion hadn't heard in years. Mrs. Yoon had outdone herself with the decorations. The kitchen staff had spent 2 days perfecting Hana's favorite dishes. Even the koi pond had been strung with tiny lanterns that made the water shimmer like something out of a dream. No one said aloud what everyone privately understood, that this celebration carried a weight beyond the usual joy of a child turning 8. Dr. Kwan's most recent reports had not been encouraging. The improvements Zara had fought so hard to nurture had plateaued, then begun ever so slightly to slip backward. There was a fragility to Hana's laughter now, a breathlessness after too much running, that no one wanted to name directly. So instead they celebrated as though volume and love alone might hold back whatever was coming. Hana sat at the head of the table in a white dress dotted with tiny embroidered suns. Her own request, insisted upon with such conviction that no one had thought to argue, surrounded by relatives, staff, and the small handful of school friends her health allowed her to see. Zara stood just behind her chair, and Tae-jin sat across from his daughter, watching her with the quiet intensity of a man trying to memorize every second. When the cake arrived, ablaze with 8 candles, the garden fell hushed in that particular way crowds do before a wish. "Make it count, Hana," Tae-jin said softly. Hana closed her eyes, small hands folded together beneath her chin, and the whole garden seemed to hold its breath alongside her. When she opened them again, she didn't reach for the candles right away. Instead she looked between her father and Zara, back and forth, with a solemn clarity children sometimes carry when they understand something adults are too afraid to say plainly. "I want Mommy and Daddy to stay together forever," she announced, loud enough for the entire garden to hear, and then blew out every candle in one triumphant breath. The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere behind Zara, a relative's fork clinked softly against a plate. Mrs. Yoon pressed a hand to her chest. Zara felt her own face flush scarlet, acutely aware of Tae-jin's gaze lifting slowly to meet hers across the candlelit table, both of them caught in a moment neither had prepared for. Then, mercifully, someone began to clap, and the garden dissolved into warm laughter and applause, the awkwardness swallowed by celebration the way only a child's unfiltered honesty can manage. Later, once the guests had gone and Hana had finally been coaxed to sleep after 3 requested songs and a promise of pancakes in the morning, Zara found herself on the veranda, staring out at the lantern-lit garden, replaying the moment again and again. She hadn't expected the ache that came with it. Not embarrassment but something far more dangerous. Longing. She's said it before. Tae-jin's voice came from behind her, quiet, unhurried. Just never so publicly. Zara turned to find him standing in the doorway. Tie loosened, the careful armor he wore during business hours softened by the late hour and the wine he'd allowed himself at dinner. "I didn't know what to say," she admitted. "Neither did I." He came to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "I have spent years building walls around this family. Around myself. It was easier that way. Fewer people to lose, fewer weaknesses for my enemies to find." He paused, watching the lanterns reflect across the pond. "Then you came into this house soaking wet from the rain, and my daughter said your name before you'd even spoken, and every wall I built began to feel very foolish. Tae-jin, I'm not asking you to say anything," he said gently, though his eyes told a different story, searching her face for something he didn't quite have the courage to name aloud. "I only wanted you to know that whatever this is, whatever brought you to us, I am no longer sorry for it. It was once. That first night, I thought you were a threat I hadn't yet identified. Now I think you may be the only good thing to walk through these gates in a very long time." Zara's throat tightened. "I feel it too," she whispered, the words slipping free before caution could stop them. "I don't understand any of this. The dreams, the drawings, the way Hana knew me before we'd ever met. But I feel it too." For a long moment neither of them moved, the space between them charged with everything unsaid, and Zara thought, foolishly, that this quiet garden might be the safest place she'd ever stood. That illusion shattered 3 days later. It began with a single envelope left at the estate's front gate, no postmark, no return address, containing only a photograph of Hana in the garden and a single typed line. "Everyone has a price for their weaknesses." Tae-jin's face went the color of ash when he read it. Within hours, security around the mansion had tripled. New guards at every entrance, cameras added along the perimeter wall, Hana's outdoor time suspended entirely. Who would do this? Zara asked, watching from the window as unfamiliar armed men took up positions along the garden wall. "Rivals," Tae-jin said grimly, jaw tight. "For years I have been careful never to show weakness. No family, no soft places for enemies to strike. Somehow, word has spread about Hana's condition. About you." He turned to her, something like guilt flickering across his features. "I should have anticipated this. I let myself become distracted by happiness, and now it may cost us both." The threats escalated with unsettling speed. A car followed Zara's driver 2 days later on a routine trip into the city, peeling away only when Tae-jin's security intercepted. A guard was found unconscious near the east wall, the intruder gone before anyone could identify him. The mansion, once alive with music and laughter, tightened into something resembling a fortress under siege. It was during a supply run for Hana's medication that the danger found Zara directly. 2 men in dark clothing forcing her car to the curb on an otherwise quiet street, wrenching open the door before her driver could react. She remembered flashes of it later. A hand closing around her wrist, a voice demanding she come quietly. The sharp terror of understanding she had become a piece on a board in a game she'd never agreed to play. Tae-jin arrived within minutes. How he'd known, how he'd moved so fast, she never fully understood. Pulling one man off her with a violence she hadn't imagined him capable of even after everything Mrs. Yoon had told her, placing himself bodily between Zara and the second attacker without a flicker of hesitation. "Get in the car," he ordered his own guards, voice like ice, and only once Zara was safely inside, shaking and breathless, did the tightly controlled fury in his face ease into something like relief. He climbed in beside her, gripping her hand so hard it nearly hurt, and didn't let go the entire drive home. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "So could you," he said. "I would rather that be me, every time." They arrived back at the estate to find the household in a different kind of chaos. Mrs. Yoon rushing across the courtyard, face stricken, calling out before the car had even fully stopped. "It's Hana." She collapsed. "Dr. Kwan says we must get her to the hospital immediately." Every thought of the attack, of danger, of anything at all beyond his daughter's failing heart vanished from Tae-jin's face in an instant. Zara was out of the car before it had fully stopped, running alongside him toward the ambulance already idling in the drive, and whatever fear she'd carried from the street outside dissolved into something far larger and far more desperate. The hospital became their entire world for the following days. Hana lay pale and impossibly small against the white sheets, tubes and monitors surrounding her. Her chest rising and falling with a shallow rhythm that made Zara's heart clench every time she looked at it. Jean barely left the corridor outside her room, running his company by phone in whispered fragments between visits, refusing every suggestion that he go home and rest. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights, sitting beside Hana's hospital bed while machines beeped their quiet vigil, that Zara finally understood. She had been sorting through her own belongings, searching her bag for a spare hair tie, when her fingers found an old photograph tucked into a forgotten pocket of her wallet, one she hadn't looked at in years. It showed her younger self in a volunteer vest, kneeling beside a small child at an airport information desk, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. The memory rushed back all at once, vivid and complete. Years ago, before nursing school, before any of this, Zara had volunteered evenings at an airport family assistance center, helping travelers navigate delays and lost connections. One stormy night, a toddler had been separated from her father amid a crowd of delayed passengers, screaming in a language Zara didn't speak, utterly inconsolable. Zara had sat with her for nearly 4 hours while airport staff searched, singing softly, drawing pictures on napkins to distract her, holding her through every wave of panicked tears. Before the little girl's father was finally found, frantic and weeping with relief, Zara had folded a paper napkin into a small crude sun and pressed it into the child's palm. "The sunshine always comes back," she'd told her, though the girl couldn't have understood the English words, "even after the longest night." She remembered the child's face now with a clarity that stole the breath from her lungs. Small, round, tear-streaked, and utterly, unmistakably Hana's. Zara's hands trembled as she set the photograph down, staring at Hana's sleeping face on the hospital pillow, 7 years and half a world away from that airport floor, and understood at last why a child she'd never officially met had recognized her on sight. She told Tae-jin everything the moment he returned from his phone call, watching the disbelief on his face slowly give way to something like wonder. "She was 3, he said quietly, remembering. "We were flying home from a business trip. She wandered from her nanny for less than a minute in the crowd, and I thought I would lose my mind before we found her. She talked about a kind sunshine lady for years afterward. I thought it was simply a child's imagination." "It wasn't imagination," Zara whispered. "It was me." Before either of them could process the full weight of that impossible truth, Dr. Kwan appeared in the doorway, his expression grave in a way that stopped their hearts before he'd said a single word. "Her heart is failing faster than we projected," he said gently. "Medication alone will not be enough much longer. There is an experimental procedure. A surgical intervention only performed successfully a handful of times, and only in cases exactly like hers. Carries significant risk. But without it, I don't believe she has much time left. The words landed like a physical blow. Tae-jin's hand found Zara's without either of them quite deciding to reach for the other, gripping tight enough to anchor them both against the floor, threatening to give way beneath their feet. In the days that followed, Tae-jin moved through the world with the singular focus of a man who had decided, absolutely, that failure was not an option. He secured the finest surgical team available, flew in specialists from 3 countries, rebuilt an entire wing of the hospital's resources around his daughter's care within 72 hours through sheer force of will and unlimited funds. But it was in the quiet moments between, in the hospital's empty family lounge at 3 in the morning, that he finally let Zara see the man beneath all that power. "I have controlled everything in my life since I was young," he told her, staring at his own hands. "Every deal, every threat, every enemy. I calculated, I planned, I won. And now the one thing I want more than anything in this world is entirely out of my hands, and I have never felt so powerless." "You're not powerless," Zara said softly. "You're doing everything a father possibly can." "It's not only for Hana that I've been fighting," he said, lifting his eyes to hers, something raw and unguarded finally breaking through. "Zara, since the night you walked into our lives, everything has changed. You gave my daughter back her hope. You gave this house back its warmth. And somewhere along the way, you gave me back a heart I thought I'd buried years ago." He reached for her hand. "I love you. I think some part of me has known it for weeks, and I was simply too afraid of what it meant to say it aloud." Zara felt the last of her own careful defenses crumble entirely. "I love you too," she whispered, and it felt less like a confession than a truth finally permitted to breathe. "I think I have from the moment Hana called me mommy, and something in me recognized it as true." They held each other in that quiet lounge as the hospital slept around them, 2 people bound together by a child's impossible dream, finally allowing themselves to feel the full weight of what they'd become to one another, even as the coming surgery hung over them like a held breath neither dared release. The morning of the procedure arrived gray and still. Hana, small and brave in her hospital gown, reached for both their hands as the surgical team prepared to wheel her toward the operating room. "Don't be scared," she told them, with the same solemn certainty she'd carried since that first stormy night. "The sunshine always comes back." Then the doors swung shut behind her, and Tae-jin and Zara were left alone in the sterile hallway, staring at the space where she'd disappeared, with nothing left to do but wait. The hours that followed stretched longer than either of them thought survivable. They sat together in the family waiting room as the light outside shifted from gray dawn to bright noon to the long gold of late afternoon, barely speaking. Hands locked together as though letting go might somehow unravel whatever fragile thread was keeping Hana alive on the other side of those doors. Jean paced. Zara prayed in a way she hadn't since childhood. Mrs. Yoon arrived at some point with food neither of them touched. Dr. Kwan's updates came in agonizing intervals, stable, proceeding as planned, almost through the most difficult portion, each one a small mercy that did nothing to ease the crushing weight of uncertainty. It was nearly 7 in the evening when Dr. Kwan finally emerged, mask lowered, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, and unmistakably relief. "It's done," he said. "The repair was successful. Her heart is responding beautifully. Barring complications, I believe Hana is going to recover fully." The sound that left Tae-jin was somewhere between a sob and a laugh, his composure finally breaking entirely as he pulled Zara into his arms, both of them shaking with relief too large to hold quietly. They were allowed in to see her an hour later, still groggy from anesthesia, her small hand finding Zara's the moment she stirred. "Told you," Hana mumbled, eyes barely open, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "The sunshine always comes back." Recovery took weeks, then months, but each one brought Hana further from the fragile child of that first stormy night and closer to the vibrant, mischievous girl she was always meant to be. Color returned permanently to her cheeks. Her laughter filled the mansion without the shadow of fear beneath it. She ran through the garden chasing the koi and the household cat with a strength that made the staff weep openly with joy more than once. The threats against the family, dealt with swiftly and decisively once Tae-jin's full attention returned to business matters, faded into memory. The mansion that had once felt haunted to Zara on that first rainy night became, slowly and completely, home. 6 months after the surgery, on a warm evening beneath the same garden lanterns that had lit Hana's birthday, Tae-jin knelt before Zara with a small velvet box and a steadiness in his voice that betrayed none of the nervousness written plainly across his face. "I have faced enemies without flinching," he told her, "but nothing has ever made my heart pound the way it does right now. Zara Thompson, you walked into our lives as a stranger my daughter somehow already loved, and you have become the very center of everything good in this house. Will you stay with us? Not as Hana's nurse, not as a dream she once had, but as my wife." Hana, watching from the veranda with barely contained excitement, could not stay quiet a second longer. "Say yes. Say yes, Mommy." Zara, laughing through tears, could hardly have said anything else. They married 1 year later in that same garden, beneath strings of golden light and the soft, familiar reflection of lanterns across the koi pond. Hana, healthy and radiant in a white dress dotted with tiny embroidered suns, stood proudly at the front of the gathered guests as her parents exchanged vows, unable to stop smiling through happy tears. When the ceremony ended and the celebration began, Hana found herself surrounded by relatives eager to hear, once again, the impossible story of how it all began. She told it happily, the way she always did, with the simple certainty of a child who had never once doubted her own dream. "I told everyone she was my mommy from my dreams," she said, beaming up at Zara and Tae-jin as they gathered her into their arms beneath the fading gold of the sunset. "I always knew she'd come back." And as the family stood together in that warm evening light, finally whole, finally home, the truth of it settled over all of them like something sacred. Sometimes the people we dream about aren't strangers at all. They're the people fate promised would find us again.